All right, peace, family. Welcome to the pro-black perspective on KWAZ Radio. We are going to conclude this Yurugu discussion. Right now, we have Cicely with us, and we're going to do chapter 10 to the end, and it's going to be mostly about universalism and cultural imperialism, but also the summary of the book. And so this is going to be a great one. Uh, if you don't mind, Cicely, can you tell people who you are and how we can reach you, as well as what you think about the book after finishing it?
I'm Cicely. You can reach me on Twitter at Cicely McLean or at New African Image Makers on Instagram. Um, I have been playing around with this book for the last really since it came out in the late '90s, mid to late '90s. And this is the first time that I've really sat down and just made the effort to pour through the whole book. And I think it's fundamental that we begin to construct a viewpoint that works for us about how we see and view and behave in the world, knowing that we have other cultures, and especially the Eurocentric culture, because it's so geared towards, it just has so many destructive tendencies ingrained in that culture. I just think that's fundamental. This reading is absolutely something that even if people don't read the whole book, they need to be more than apprised with the strategies of if there's a name she has for it, the strategies of where you say one thing and you really mean something else.
Rhetorical ethics.
And that's what we get a lot of, and we spend a lot of time trying to make sense out of things that will never make sense according to our city. And I just think it's necessary that we revisit the idea of identifying culturally who our enemies are and identifying culturally a summation or an assessment of European culture and how it has affected the rest of the world at this point. So I just think it's absolutely well researched. I can't wait to dive into some of the sidelines from the notes. So I'm glad I had a chance to read through it with you guys.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here to read it with us. I don't think we would have done this without your encouragement. You know, so appreciate that as well. Because I was planning on putting the book to the side. And you were like, why would you put it to the side? And so shit. And I'm grateful that we didn't. All right, so what we're going to do is, as usual, we're going to try to only read about 6 passages, and then have a discussion on those. So the first page I want us to go to would be 512. So
Wait, what page?
512.
Okay.
All right. So for those of you who could see from home, 512 is like the second page of chapter 10. So chapter 10 starts at 511, Universalism, the syntax of cultural imperialism, and then, she just goes in. She doesn't wait. She's not, she just goes in. So we're going to start off on the first paragraph, which starts off with the whole, and I think I'm supposed to stop somewhere along when she says something about the myth. Let me just, okay, so up to the next section. So, without further ado, let's go to it, right? The whole for Plato represents being, value, and the possibility of knowledge. The part or partial is mere becoming and meaningless by itself, dependent, i.e. dependent. It is the nature of the rational that is associated with universal characteristics. The particular, therefore, becomes the irrational and is associated with mere opinion, continuing in the same syntactical mode, but in terms of the ideology of progress, as people become more rational, they become more universal. Culture is associated with the particular, with opinion, and with the irrational. Civilization becomes the universally valid and adaptable cultural form created by rational human beings. It represents knowledge and therefore progress. All of this is the European's attempt to make order out of chaos. It is the European ultimawazo. The related Platonic dichotomies of reason, emotion, knowledge, opinion, the whole and the part, are involved in the logic of all European value distinctions, and the universal and the particular extensions of these are the good and bad of European ideology. Nationalism is particularism and therefore represents non-value in terms of European mental categories. And just as it became necessary for Europeans to represent their culture by the term civilization, it became necessary to represent their expressions of nationalism as internationalism as well, i.e., their interests as the interests of all people, the small minority speaking for the overall majority of the world. This imparts additional value to their cultural commitments in terms of their own system of values, but it also does more. It acts to support their goals interculturally. By camouflaging European political interests as universal human goals, Europeans disarm the victims of their imperialism. Culturally inspired flames of resistance to European aggression are extinguished by a sea of universal rhetoric. We are seeking the good of humankind while you are acting merely to further the ends of a narrowly defined nationalism. The circle is indeed a vicious one, for the more successful European culture is imposed on majority cultures, the more convincing becomes the rhetoric until we, first world intellectuals, European trained, struggle also to represent not our own, but the universal humanitarian interest, which of course has already been decided in terms of European value. We find it unintelligent to talk in terms of race. An example of how this works can be demonstrated by a common contemporary use of the European value dichotomy of abstract good and concrete bad. African black children, it is said, are severely handicapped in that they tend to think only in concrete terms and generally unable to think abstractly. An unfortunate reaction among people of African descent is to seek to prove that African black children can think just as abstractly as white children. But they are jumping the gun, for the following questions have not been asked. What does it mean to think abstractly? What value does it have? If in fact people do think abstractly, what does it mean in terms of the interests of the white society? When the charge is made, one could conceivably ask, what kind of abstraction? If European values are assumed, then one has no choice but to become as Europeans, as they, for they are most certainly best. There is only one way to break the hold, and that is to be able to recognize the phenomenon of European cultural imperialism, no matter what form it takes. This recognition can be facilitated by a critical examination of the concepts that are used to package it. Its disguises range from so-called universal religion to objective scholarship, from the abstraction of progress, science, and knowledge of the pseudo-altruistic goals of humanitarianism, internationalism, and world peace. Our objective is to make the subtle manifestations of European cultural nationalism more easily discernible. The early Christian formulation exemplifies the function of European imperialism. While it is projected as a world religion fashioned for the salvation of all people, regardless of their cultural origins, it is in fact interpreted as a mandate for the spread of European culture and European control. It preempts other religious formulations in terms of the syntax of European ideology, because they are nationally or culturally defined, while the Christian statement supposedly has universal significance, and yet, of course, the reality is that Christian ideology is clearly defined in terms of the European nationalistic endeavor, that is, in terms of a European political interest. Simultaneously, as Europeans march throughout the world saving souls, the number of those who accept the rhetoric of their ideology are increasing. Christianity is a superior religion because it is universal. The indigenous religions of the would-be converts are inferior because they are nationalistic and culture-bound. Hence, European nationalism goes unrecognized while it spreads and destroys. That is the function of the universal in terms of European cultural imperialism. The monotheistic statement corresponds to the objective of universal control, of monolithic control within the West, and of European control throughout the world. If there is only one God to obey, let it be the Christian God of the West, i.e. the European himself. Monotheism conceptually conforms also to the normative structure of the Utamawazo, characterized as well by the universal imperative. Its political purpose, however, is to discredit other national gods and thereby other nations. Several African-centered theorists have drawn attention to the way in which the European statement of the standard of a universal art serves to impose this aesthetic judgment on African and other majority artistic expressions. See Chapter 3 of this work. This use of the universal in the cause of European nationalism is classic. It displays a pattern repeated over and over again so that the imposition of all facets of the value system is facilitated. It is becoming more and more obvious that to neutralize the effect of the universalistic rhetoric, one needs merely reject the universal as a viable goal, thereby eliminating the force of the rhetoric of European ideology. Understanding the nature of the European asili enables us to explain the various modes of European thought and behavior as issuing from the generative core of the culture. Universalism, then, becomes one of the themes that contributes to the creation of a cohesive and well-constructed whole. That entity is in this case a culture able to project itself consistently as superior to others and yet normative for them. The need for such a relationship to other cultures is within the European asili, within its cultural germ. Universalism then becomes part of the natural unfolding of the asili. All manifestations of the universal in the culture find their origin in the character of the Utamaroho. Europeans use universalistic terms to describe themselves. They are modern man, civilized man, and universal man. It is above all the nature of the Utamaroho that they project themselves onto the world. They are world saviors and world conquerors. They are world peacemakers. In 1991, the stated objective of European Americans was to save the world from the madman Saddam Hussein. They give religion and culture, civilization to this world. In this view, their national and cultural creations are those that are best for all people. It is ultimately the European obsession with unlimited power over others that brings universalism into their conceptions. This desire for and definition of power can be found at the base of all their cultural creations. Power for them is not a force or energy, it is control. The origins of the universal and the European Utamawazo are precisely the same. Obsessive nationalism represents for the European mind the ability to control the universe. By this process, the unknown becomes known. The disordered becomes ordered. Nothing is unknowable. The universal represents independence, that which controls, while the particular represents the dependent, that which is controlled. Let us see how the characteristic of the Utamaroho, manifested as the theme of universalism, works in terms of liberal ideology, and how the rhetoric of disinterest serves the interest of the intellectual expression of European nationalism. Okay, so, it's a little long. I hope none of the other passages are that long, but but that was it. Cicely, since you're here, what would you say about that one? That particular segment?
I started, when I read it, I just started immediately thinking about the ways in which this method that the Europeans employ to make this, make themselves the normal, and then we're such that we don't even realize that by buying into not just the terminology but the ideas behind it, we have kind of circumvented our own culture, circumvented our own power, and are kind of skipping to their tune, which we know is offbeat. So I started thinking about all the ways in which I've seen us do this, and I've felt myself doing this or being pushed to do this. All the times when, you're a student, you're studying, and your professors are pushing you, and you're like, you're resistant because it's something that's not right. Why are you trying to make it seem as though, your concept of good, bad, right, wrong, appropriate, inappropriate, life and death are absolutely universal, and I have to be beholden to your conception of all these concepts in order to get a grade in this class that is acceptable. So I think it would be very cool if we actually sit down and just start making examples, like real drawn out examples, kind of like, and in fact, I was listening to Steve Kofi, and believe it or not, even though he wasn't an intellectual, he kind of hit on a lot of the things brought up in Yurugu in his lectures. And he was talking about a commercial where Michael Jordan was eating a sandwich. Larry Bird walks up and goes, "Hey, I'll play you, one on one or whatever for your sandwich." And of course, Coakley was just talking about the effects of us being in that construct where somebody else is playing for our sandwich. We already have the sandwich.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have to play the game. You know what I'm saying? How can you win your own sandwich? And by extension, why would you play to lose your own sandwich that you already have?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like we can just keep going on and on with these different examples, but we need to do that so that people can take these theoretical, very academic speech and break it down into how we're actually moving and operating in our day-to-day lives. So that's kind of what I was drawn to when I read this section.
Appreciate it. So yeah, I think quite a few people have used that same commercial as an example, because I feel like I might have heard Irritated Genie or do the same thing, because it's just like, why am I playing for my own sandwich? That doesn't make any sense. But I'm gonna say from the chat, I see I'm a Bookman is here. That's dope. But just to continue, oh yeah, peace. I'm a Bookman. She says hello. So just to continue though, I want to say also, this is something I neglected to mention earlier. When we read first chapter 1, what I thought about when she makes this dichotomy between logic and emotion is, at the time I was watching the Star Trek franchise. And the Star Trek franchise kind of encapsulates this universalism, this Yurugu, and it's something that you also see in sci-fi, generally speaking. So for Star Trek, they have this race of people, like they have this other race who are non-emotional and purely logical. They're called Vulcans or whatever, and they are considered throughout the original series, they're considered the superior people to human. So they make it so that the logical individual, the pure logic, the no emotions, is superior. And of course, we kind of see this in like normal dialogue, normal conversation, where I think I was conversing with somebody, and they were just like, "Hey, let's not be emotional here." And you're like, "Wait, what?" Not to say that I was emotional, but emotional becomes an insult, especially in this culture, especially to against men. When of course we are holistic individuals who have emotions. Like our emotions are a part of who we are, but it comes back to that other dichotomy. I also want to say that another part of Star Trek, and not just Star Trek, but there was this video game I used to play. Just to list through some examples. This video game called Mass Effect, and there's also this thing called Star Wars, whatever. Well, the idea is that eventually humans come to a place where they are no longer quote-unquote racist, no longer racially discriminating, and anybody can become anything, but white people are still in charge. Like no matter what, like you watch Star Trek, Captain Kirk still in charge, or the Federation still in charge. You go to, like I said, there's a video game called Mass Effect. The president of the United States Federation is a white guy. You go to Star Wars. Everybody's living harmony with whatever, but then in a sense, like white guys are in charge. Like they have an emperor who's a white guy. Basically, all like no matter what, white people are going to try to maintain this racial hierarchy, even when they say let's balance out things that are going on. So Afrojam's here. He says, "Peace, everyone." He says, "Mass Effect, the game series." Was just typing it before you said it. Yeah. So like Mass Effect was like I said, like, and the thing is that when you're a young person, you might be playing these video games that a lot of our elders don't know about, right? but we're being indoctrinated with the same, okay, we have racial harmony, we have races all engaging each other, we're getting rid of nationalism and particularism and national interest, but we're doing it for the universal interest, and that universal interest just happens to be white people on the top. And that's something that's always happening, even when it comes to Christianity, you know? Well, or even when it comes to religion in general. It's just, generally speaking, these universal religions, whether they're, you know, Islam, whether they're Christianity, or whether they're even Judaism in a sense, right? But all of them kind of say, you know what, at the end of the day, the rewards or the leadership or the top is going to be the people who, you know, the Eurasians who originated it, in a sense. And I think that's something that we have to really imbibe and really have to question, because what Marimba Ani is saying is that instead of us looking for a world of racial peace with white people on top, which is what they're trying to push, we could just look for a world of black people on top, notwithstanding whether it's racial peace or not. You know, we're not looking for universal interest, but we should be looking for our particular interest. And that in itself, because realistically speaking, that's what white people are doing. You get what I'm saying?
Exactly.
That's what white people are doing. They're just telling you they're not. But what they are doing is that they're always looking for their particular interest, and we're the only people saying, you know what, no. And that's why I said, like that's why I like that Hillary Clinton video from last time, because, you know, if China, because nothing was wrong with China, what China was doing, right? But, you know, I'm just saying that, right? But what was wrong for it was that white people would no longer be on the top. That was the only thing that was bad. You know? If China was doing all this industrialization, nobody would, like Hillary Clinton wouldn't care. If China's doing anything, but as soon as China is threatening the supremacy of white people, that's when it's a problem. You know? Now the Chinese could easily say racial harmony. The Chinese could easily say we're doing it for racial harmony, we're not gonna suppress, we're not gonna oppress, we're just gonna be the top. And that's the problem. So it's like we have to realize, and this is why it's so important. That's why I like this book, is because it's exposing, you know, the lies, it's exposing the flaws, and it's telling you what you need to do. You know?
It's exposing the hypocrisy that is inherent in their speech. You know, no matter which European language it is.
Yeah. And that's what I want to say, too, about those examples, because, you know, the brother, or Afrojam, I don't know if it's a brother or sister, but Afrojam points out Mass Effect. The thing I want to point out, too, is that no matter where you go in this sci-fi universe, they're always speaking English, you know? And they even comment on it in the series where, like for Star Trek, you know, they go on to different planets, and they're talking to people with no universal translator or nothing, right? And then at some point, one of them says, I was wondering why everybody speaks English, you know? Because, you know, they would find humans on different planets, you know, white humans no less, right? But they would find humans, and they'd be like, and they just dialogue. And then at some point in the show, they're like, you know, basically they said that, you know, there was some species that populated other planets with humans or something, right? But allegedly in the English language, you know, that we speak. And it's not like... It's not just because, you know, it's an English-speaking program, but it's more so to say this is what the future should look like. You know, the whole world speaking one language, being one people. You know.
Do you remember a comedian said that if you watch the like Flintstones and the Jetsons, you realize there's no black people in the past and there's none in the future.
There you go.
I don't remember which comedian said it, but it was when he said it, I was like, man, this guy gets it.
Exactly. You know, and like that's like this is their vision of the past. This is their vision of the future, and we have to be mindful of what their vision of the future is. If they are going to be in the leadership position, or if they're vying for the leadership position, you know. And as soon as, and this is one of the most important things I want us as a people to understand, that if anybody, in fact, this is one of the things I used to tell people when I had an organization or whatever, but if anybody is trying to lead you somewhere, you got to ask them, how is this the North Star? You know? how is this going to lead me to freedom, right? And what is your vision of freedom? Because that's something that I also think is pretty important. Because I just pointed out Alma Bookman. She was a part of this discussion of Abrahamic religion, blah 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 blah. And the question came up, whether these religions could lead you to liberation, right? And it has to be. We have to ask ourselves, what does liberation mean for us? What does what does it mean for us to be liberated, and what does it look like? Because there's this example, there's this picture, there's several pictures. If you look up, Jesus in whatever African country you want, right? You're going to likely find either statues of this white man, or you're going to find people, which is more despicable. You're going to find people posing with white guys who have full beards and long hair. Like taking photographs of white guys with, just as if they were holy or divine. And this right here is that what liberation looks like? For our people to, kind of almost worship whiteness, And that's really that's a question I think is important. I don't remember the speaker. I'm going to try to stop, but I don't remember the speaker's name per se. But he was like, one of the things that religion does is it tells you, it's one of the statements is that, I'm white and I'm closer to God, But that's pretty much it. I want to say that later on she goes into some philosophers. I want to point that out to everybody listening, that she goes into at least 3 philosophers. She describes them. So definitely pick up this book if you want to read her description of them. Claude Henry Saint-Simon, John Stuart Mills, and then she also goes into Emily Durkheim. So if anybody wants to read this, like I said, this is a PDF, so you can download the PDF. It's on the
the only other thing I would like to point out at this section is, of course, sometimes you might read something like this, and it's like a damning, critique of European culture.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question becomes, well, what do we do about it? And then how do we do it? So she actually goes on page 513, saying that we should ask ourselves some questions about if they tell you that you can't think abstractly, instead of running to figure out the examples you could bring forward of how abstractly our children can think, you should ask yourself basically, what's the point? Who does this serve? What's the, as you say, how will this liberate us if we do think abstractly? And then maybe it'd be worth looking at the ways in which we think abstractly. But we might even find that this is just a smokescreen, and we're running to jump through yet another hoop that's going to dissolve and leave us just standing there with dissolved hoopness standing around our feet and nothing else. So the questions, what does it mean to think abstractly? What value does it have? If, in fact, people do think abstractly, what does it mean in terms of the interest of the white society? When the charge is made, one could conceivably ask, what kind of abstraction? So you gotta, before you run to respond to, whatever you're facing, you have to, start asking yourself a lot of questions. Mainly, what is the point? And I think that will cut down a lot of, as you were describing on Twitter the other day, the noise. The noise that's a lot of noise right there. Because you're constantly running in a circle trying to, obtain resources that you already have.
I want to say...
And it's kind of ridiculous. But the how comes in challenging ourselves, that we don't just go along with the Euro-Asili and the norm that they have prescribed, that we challenge ourselves to see the norm for what it is that we need to do in the way that we want to live in the future that we envision.
Yeah. I want to say...
Anyway, I just thought that was...
no, I appreciate that. I appreciate that, because a lot of people are going to sit home and still wonder, what is wrong with abstract thinking, right? So I think it's actually, we should actually talk about that. So here it goes, right? There was a tweet actually earlier today that said, why, I think it was like African people send their children to be, look, African leaders send their leaders to Europe, America, so on and so forth, to learn, how to whatever, how to lead or whatever, but outside of Africa. And so when they come back to Africa, they don't know anything about the material realities. You know what I mean? A part of that abstract thinking is to say, I can actually think of solutions for material conditions in Africa outside of Africa because I'm thinking about it abstractly instead of concretely. You know, you want to be able to think concretely, think about the material conditions as they're happening or as they're going. That is what you should be doing, because if you're thinking abstractly, if you're thinking away from the problem, if you're thinking, in isolation, thought processes in the middle of Europe, right? Your solutions are not going to be suited, I'm actually going to admit that I was listening to Shaka Ra had a Pan-African program where he had Amma Bookman on, and she was talking about Haiti, right? He had Dwayne Amawali as well, and a bunch of other, fascinating people in the diaspora. But I want to focus on one thing she said about Haiti, and how in Haiti, apparently they had a particular type of pig, like they had like black pigs or something like that, and Wazoo and the Americans said, no, don't raise these black pigs anymore. Don't have these black pigs. Instead, use American pigs. Basically buy American pigs and use it there. And what happened with those pigs was that the pigs weren't suited for the environment, and I guess the farms couldn't sustain themselves, or the pigs couldn't survive or whatever. Long story short is that if you're thinking of the hunger problem in Haiti, in America, right? You're a bunch of American politicians thinking about the hunger problem in Haiti and thinking, oh, how can I profit? Abstractly, I can sell pigs to Haiti. I could profit from this pig trade. I could profit from the pig feed, all that kind of stuff. And overall, the most people are going to benefit are, people in America are going to benefit, and people in Haiti are going to benefit. It's a win-win, as opposed to them just raising their black pigs or whatever. And I guess black in color, I don't know. But the point is that instead of them raising their pigs and whatever, that's you abstractly thinking, right? And not even taking into account all the things. But if you go into the material conditions, you say, look, these pigs are, indigenous to Haiti. They can grow, reproduce. Maybe we could do feed based off of how they are. But the point is that if you think concretely of what pigs are more suited to that environment, right? That's when you can win out. Or even if you think concretely in the sense of, hey, there are pig farmers there who are very proficient, very whatever, and you don't even think it's out of the abstract of, oh, well, I think this pig is going to be the best in this location, that and that. So if you think down to the personal, people level, that's when, if that were done, Haiti could have been a thriving community. Now, of course, we all know maybe America's not, into Haiti being a thriving community, but the point being that this is something that, But the point is that even our youth, like our Haitian youth, or our African youth, or wherever, they might be thinking about how to fix the Haiti problem, and they're also going to try to import pigs, or they're also not going to take into consideration that there might be pig farmers down there that they can learn from, or so on and so on. They're going to think abstractly in the middle of the West or what have you, and that in itself is a problem. So yes, I appreciate you, sister, for pointing out how important concrete thinking is, and that white people are kind of giving you this red herring and giving you these distractions in order to manipulate you.
It's not that we can't think abstractly and we don't, I think we are encouraged to think in all the ways that we can possibly think. It's just that, things have to make sense. It's kind of the same with art. She goes through a whole chapter, not a whole chapter, but a section talking about art and the way that it's set up, in the European construct, and it's utterly ridiculous. You got people out here creating all kinds of stuff and saying it's for the sake of art. Well, we're African, and from our viewpoint, we don't just do things just to be doing them, So we think about it abstractly, and we can maybe represent things abstractly. But ultimately, if it's not serving us, then what is the point? And so we have to start asking those questions before we do whatever we do. Is this going to help? Or, and I see that a lot in the repack community coming over to Africa. People just take on this whole savior complex, and it's like you leaving a problematic neighborhood, and then proclaiming that you're going to come over as a diasporan to the continent and fix this particular thing that's going over here through creating an NGO or a nonprofit organization. And I'm just like, wow, you really need to get a prize as to what hoops you jumping through and why. Because right now it's not making any sense. I could see, you creating an NGO or some of these other things as a tax shelter, then that lets me know your head is on your shoulders. But if you come with that savior complex, it's really amazing how we gloss over crack vials and school shootings and carjackings and bad water and just poor environments to hop over to Africa and fix similar things that are happening over here. And it's like how?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's a good point too, because a lot of people might be like, well, if you could fix it, why don't you fix it where you was from? You know what I mean?
Right. The reason why that happens is because we are not working off the basic, the charge that our need is leveling. So it's confusion after that. You're just doing anything. If it works, great. But more than likely, it's not going to work. But we're operating, we don't know what we're doing, why, and to whom, for what, or what purpose. So that's what Yurugu, that's where it comes in, because it helps us say, hey, listen, we know they said this, but we're looking at exhibit A through Z showing that this is what they really meant. And given that in the situation that it is created, then we need to do A, B, and C. So that we're skipping all over that part.
But I mean,
we just, yeah.
I'll just clarify for everybody at home though, that I absolutely agree that we should go to Africa. That we should fix the problems. I mean, well, not fix the problems, but that we should immerse ourselves in Africa and
no doubt,
there,
no doubt. Yeah. Africa is primary.
Yeah.
I'm not disputing that at all. But what I'm saying is that on what basis do you have confidence that you can fix Chinese interference, for example, just as a loose example, in African politics, when we are mostly all living in communities where all the business.
Sorry, you cut out. Can you hear me? Damn, you can't talk about China, huh? I'm just joking. Are you there? All right. So
what I'm about is actually coming out of the Euro-centered imagination and coming into the reality of what's actually happening on the ground here in Africa and getting in where you fit in order to shore up that foundation. So it's not that we can't help. We are supposed to help. We got to do our part. We got to pull our weight because Africa is primary. But at the same time, it doesn't mean, you come with that savior complex because I love my people, but that complex is garbage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the overconfidence, yeah. Let me say, or arrogance. A lot of I want to say American arrogance almost, but.
Right. It's almost like we've bought into the concept of American exceptionalism, and we've inflated our sense of importance based on our proximity to white people. And that's problematic, and down to the core.
Yeah, that's what I was saying too.
And it has to be addressed. And I just think that this book and some of the methods that she's outlining is definitely a tool towards unpacking that mess, because it's a mess.
All right, check this out. We're gonna go to 524, and we're gonna read the. I want to say I didn't say how much of it, but maybe I'll just cut it short. All right. So 524, a case study. So after she talks about the philosophers and all that, she goes into a case study. This is the political function of objectivity, a case study. So the myth of objectivity and the use of methodology of objectification, scientism, is one aspect of universalism and is an expression of the European ultima rojo, and as a tool of Western cultural imperialism. By offering an ethnographic example from contemporary American society, I can demonstrate how this works. In 1970, the African and African American members of the African Studies Association challenged the work of the then 20-year-old organization as being fundamentally invalid and illegitimate. The ASA represented the American academic establishment. Its members were mainly from the socioeconomic middle stratum of the white colonial minority, just as Marquette describes the existential situation of the European anthropologists abroad. The dissenters said that instead of furthering Euro-American interest in Africa, the study of African life should be undertaken from a Pan-Africanist perspective. These Pan-Africanists acknowledged their own perspective and wanted it, and their participation to influence the ideological thrust of the activities and work of the ASA. In an article entitled Confrontation at Montreal, Professor John Henry Clark said, "African people will no longer permit our people to be raped culturally, economically, politically, and intellectually, merely to provide European scholars with intellectual status symbols of African artifacts hanging in their living rooms and irrelevant and injurious lectures in their classrooms. We suspect that this is a new area of academic colonialism, and that it is not unrelated to the neo-colonialism that is attempting to re-enslave Africa by controlling the minds of African people." The group argued that scholarship was indeed political in its conclusion and uses. They stated their perspective and ideological commitments openly and said that the political interest of African peoples should determine the character of African studies. The group rejected the offer of token representation made by ASA, and under the leadership of John Henry Clark, James Turner, Chike Onwuachi, and others, the African Heritage Studies Association split irrevocably with the ASA. Now let us look briefly at the method of counter-argument used by their opponents. In an article entitled Politics and Scholarship, published in the ASA Journal, African Studies Review, Benjamin Neimer begins patronizingly by saying that two good goals are in collision in African studies in the United States: the fostering of certain black interest and the untrammeled pursuit of scholarship. The word certain is a signpost signaling the limitations of the Pan-African position, while scholarship represents the universal and therefore that which is valued. This meant that the Pan-Africanists were opposing scholarship, an indefensible position. Like science and progress or truth, scholarship is something no one wants to tamper with. Who among us, after all, wants to interfere with the pursuit of science or with the course of progress on which it takes us? We are encouraged to perceive these to be universal pursuits, not particulars or parochial, like Pan-African self-determination. There is no question in Neimer's mind as to who will survive the collision. Neimer continues, untrammeled scholarly inquiry is recognized as rational inquiry in pursuit of truth, and very few people are in principle against the pursuit of truth. Of course not, because the pursuit of truth is nothing but a meaningless abstraction, a rhetorical phrase used to cloud issues, not clarify them. Neimer's article is riddled with these kinds of abstractions, which, interestingly enough, are designed to appeal to the emotions of his audience, the metaphysical pathos, lovejoy of the European tradition, while pretending to appeal to reason only. By using these terms, he succeeds in erecting a wall of rhetorical disinterest designed to disarm the avowed African nationalist who is admittedly politically and ideologically motivated. But the demystification of the syntax of universalism can prevent us from being intimidated by such terms. We must demand that the writer concretize his abstractions and put meaningful content into them. What exactly is untrammeled scholarship? Whose truth? Certainly Neimer would not accept Fanon's definition of truth. And I think that's actually... I'll just stop there. I'll just stop there. So, so that right there. What did you think about that passage, Cicely?
Yeah, it's kind of like we seem to be operating within this paradigm, and they've kind of set it up so where that if you challenge certain aspects, then you're seen as unscientific, non-scholarly, and therefore not to be taken seriously. and it's a trap. It's a trap, and it's a trick of the devil, because I have seen people, PhD level people, level all kinds of charges at people that we know and respect, that we read, at other organizers, because they don't have Euro censored and approved credentials. And in fact, that's been a overarching aspect of our organizing over the last 100 years. The fact that we haven't been able to get past that particular obstruction. And just think about it like this: the Du Bois and Garvey situation. That's kind of where we saw that whole that time frame, is when we saw that whole development, where they really tied us up with this scholarship thing. Okay, so once they tied us up into the concept of big up in the people who have been to college, and big up in giving them all the European validation that they could possibly muster up. After they did that, then they made sure that the funding for all the schools and all the research was tied up, with these so-called foundations, who all have, the same Eurocentric goals. So we've literally been walking in this. It's like the story in the Bible, where you walking in this same, 40-mile radius for 40 years, but in our case, it's been 100. And this is exactly what we're dealing with. We have to get past, their validation, in order to accept the fact that it's more than one way to do things, especially from our perspective. And so I hope, that's just another example. It's like, and they'll even pit other scholars against Black scholars that are attempting to jump out of those paradigms, out of those Eurocentric paradigms, by saying that it wasn't scholarly enough, or it's like they're constantly using this same blade. It should be dull by now, and it should not be able to cut us anymore. But unfortunately, we have to drop those Eurocentric paradigms in order for the blade to lose all its for that to be that weapon to be neutralized.
Yeah.
I hope did that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to go to the comments. Afro Jam. Thanks, Afro Jam, for the comments. But the comment says the repatriates are a great example. The former Americans, British, and Brazilians of 1800s Africa pushed Christian European universalism. Not a new thing, I mean, I should have read this earlier when it was a thing, but yeah, that's it. The former American, British, Brazilians pushed Christian, and that's what I'm saying. That's what they always do. I want to go into this scholarship thing a little too, and I want to say that this, I actually had this same sort of incident recently, right? There was this, I'm not a Jesus guy or whatever, a Christian guy. Everybody knows that, right? But I'm thinking, I'm not like. A part of me is like this. A lot of the story is so made up. You kind of wonder. I mean, some people might say there's some parts of it's realistic. I don't think so, right? But I'm like, it doesn't, like, he probably never existed, Somebody else tells me, hey, look, that goes against all Western scholarship. That goes against scholarship, and that's unscholarly, and nobody wants to hear unscholarly. And, like, the whole thing is that, even though scholarship, right? Even though the scholarship, and I'm just trying to explain to this person, I'm like, the scholastic tradition is going to be in their particular interest. Like they use scholarship, they use it, quote unquote, like if you see what the name of the chapter is about, how it's like they're trying to be objective. They're really subjective with their scholarship, but they claim otherwise, and it kind of disarms you. So, this person might say, hey, well, these are atheists saying that Jesus might have existed. These are things, but it's like, no, they're all Westerners. And at the core of their Western construct is this myth or this mythological Jesus, or this mythologized Jesus in a sense, right? But later on, I find out that this same person, or this person knew somebody who wrote a very profound, description of, or a very profound comparison and conclusion that, let's say, from the Bible, that the Israelites and the Canaanites were the same people, right? So they write this. So they write this thing that doesn't make any sense, but they use scholarship to justify it. It kind of shows you, and this is something that I was saying earlier, that when it comes to scholarship, when it comes to research, right, it's always subjective, because the example that I was using before that was, does this person think there's a gay gene? And they were like, no, I don't think it's a gay gene. But you can pick up a bunch of research documents that, quote unquote, prove that there's a gay gene. Now, I don't think there's a gay gene, but I do think that a person who is homosexual or homosexualized can find a bunch of ways to do some research to present an argument that would justify their argument. This is the thing that scholarship does. It's like what the white boy does is that he sits down and he says, how can I be the best? How can I be the top? And then how can I trick a bunch of other people that I am in fact the best in the top? And that's what I'll call scholarship.
There's another way that I think this it's insidious, man. This is like an infection, and you need to cut it out. Do you remember the Ferguson blow up several years ago? And there was a brother who literally was almost a neighbor of Mike Brown, and his name was Darren Sears. Does that ring a bell to you?
Yes. Yeah, it rings a bell.
Darren Sears?
Yes, it rings a bell.
Okay, so let me just use this to try to illustrate even a different sidestep. So we're talking about Du Bois and Garvey. That was 100 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. That's when the construct of our so-called black leadership in America was kind of set up. And the scholars were pushed out, and the scholars and the artists were pushed out in front of all the other Africans in America by the Europeans. And obviously, there's a reason why they do that. And if unscientifically, the smartest people are the easiest ones to trick. And it's a small group that you can validate and use to infiltrate, diffuse, and just modify the larger group. And so that guy was cast. Now fast forward to Mike Brown's murder. Now here's Darren Seals. He's a hardworking guy in the neighborhood. He's not college educated, but he he comes out and immediately you can see he has leadership qualities. He can mobilize and organize, and he starts putting things together. And then here comes the plants, the European approved organizers, right? Mm-hmm. At the end of that, and I'm going to say the end was when they murdered Darren Seals, because he was found shot and burned in his vehicle. Exactly. Okay, about, a few years after Mike Brown was murdered. Yeah. So, and if you ever follow him, you would hear him talking about, without having this connection, because he didn't read Yurugu, clearly, and he didn't seem like he read too much Garvey either, based on what I've heard from him in his videos and what I read from his social media. However, he did encounter the problem that Garvey encountered with Du Bois and the Harlem Renaissance NAACP crew, which was that I'm being negated or denigrated because I'm not college educated, and therefore the community is being kind of influenced not to take my leadership as seriously as they should. When really, any of our leaders and all of our leaders who are not necessarily college educated should be taken a lot more seriously than what we have right now. So it never was a case where we don't need leadership. We just need more people who are in leadership positions and who are able to be in leadership positions. But our focus on big up in the scholars that are European approved has cut us off at the pass, and we're not even taking our own selves as seriously as we should at this point. There doesn't have to be a one Marcus Garvey, but there needs to be a whole bunch of us that are trained and focused to the level of Marcus Garvey, so that in case of being shot and burned in your vehicle, there's another person who can continue on, and the leadership is rotational instead of singularly focused on one point person. It's too much pressure on one person and not enough on everybody else. And this is what Darren Seals repeatedly tried to communicate. And here we are. Here we are.
Yeah. So Darren Seals, like quite a few other people, were also found dead, like shot and burned in their cars. And they were all like young.
About 5 other ones.
Yeah, exactly. Like around the country, around America, that's what would happen. It's saying no data.
Those 6 are specifically in the St. Louis area.
Oh, okay.
Those 6 that I'm talking are specifically in the St. Louis area. And if you notice of who was killed, again, you got to listen to Darren Seals and really think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's an entity that we're dealing with which is trying to separate us from the homegrown and grassroots leadership that we need, that is all around us. We do not have to have the Sharpton, the Jackson, or whoever, even, Minister Farrakhan, we have them, but we cannot expect them to carry the full weight. There's more of us who are willing and who could be better prepared if we were to let go of our European approved status that we have to see on people before we take them serious. So, I mean, this is a conversation, again, there's a lot of sidebars that can happen with this, but I'm just pointing out the fact that we put emphasis on where they told us to put emphasis on.
Yeah.
And what it has resulted in is really a leadership crisis and a crisis of vision for us as African people.
I also want to point out too
that's what we can talk about today, but we could definitely just go into that.
Yeah. All right, so Afrojam says, I've told people that the scholars and scientists are the priests and bishops of yesteryear. And that's the truth, I also want to point out that, that dichotomy, that Du Bois-Garvey dichotomy, was repeated, was a repeat of the earlier Du Bois and Booker T. Washington dichotomy, where Booker T. Washington was saying, let's do some practical, let's do some down to earth stuff.
And that's why Booker T. Washington was killed as opposed to, deported, which is what they did to Garvey. If you understand what I'm saying, they couldn't. It's like when you present, as Coakley says, the intent plus the capability, that determines the threat, your level of threat that you are. So Booker T had the intent and the capacity and the capability, and he was moving and inspiring and doing things according to his perspective and what he thought was good for us at that time. So when they attacked him, it really wasn't working. It didn't work. Booker T was the beginning of Marcus Garvey. So they definitely failed, and they definitely killed him because they could not cap what Booker T. Washington was bringing to the table on our behalf. They couldn't cap it.
And that's another
And
thing
so
too.
they took his life.
Yeah, so
and they overtook his legacy and used it to stab us repeatedly over decades with the syphilis experiment.
Oh yeah, that's true too. So I mean, like I said, I don't know about killing or not, but that's what I'm saying. If he was killed, it's covered up, and that's one of the things.
It is covered up. It's been covered up to the extent where we don't even talk about it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like
not just that. I want to say this too, that we actually, to this day, or at least when I was growing up, we would make fun of each other as if Booker T. Washington was a like you call somebody a Booker T. Washington, even though Booker T. Washington was providing. Yeah, exactly. Even though Booker T. Washington was providing funding for different African causes, across the planet, but particularly, but yeah. So it's like even though this guy was a active Pan-Africanist, even though he was, faithful to the cause, notwithstanding, he's used as the insult, whereas Du Bois isn't, and Du Bois is still celebrated and so on and so forth. But anyway, let's move forward. Oh yeah, so the next page. This one's actually going to be a longer passage. This one is page 541, okay? So we're going to skip ahead to 541. Like I said to everybody at home, you can get this book on your own. And I also want to tell people, make sure you check out the different programs. Make sure if you're not subscribed, get subscribed. Check out the other programs on KWAZ Radio. Let me just tell you guys what it was. I didn't do it earlier. But there's Bitter Medicine Podcast. There's Harsh Reality Podcast, and of course there's the Queen Council. So make sure you guys come through, check out the programs, and subscribe, drop some comments, engage people. Let us build up something. All right. So let's keep going. This is 541: Concrete Human Behavior versus Abstract European Humanism. So this is going to be interesting. So the moral philosophy or attitude of humanism is regarded as a development of European speculative thought and as being characteristic of the highest form of European moral behavior. It is defined as a commitment to things human, to the eliciting of, to the cultivation of the human. The humanist is sensitive to humanists. To the perceptive cultural scientists, these phrases would describe a primarily majority culture, not European worldview, and would explain their apparent nature of classical traditional kin-based societies, not European culture. But there is another idea associated with European humanism, and that is the implied commitment to and love of humanity as an abstract conception. This in opposition to the natural attachments of family, kin group, culture, or as is derogatorily termed, tribe. If one is a European humanist, one loves man with a capital M. But it doesn't work out that way, for the demands of the latter have no relationship to the concrete love and identification with other human beings. One represents a very controlled and purely speculative and theoretical attitude. The other is a reflection of an emotional tie, a sympathetic relationship, a feeling of identification. European humanism is, in this regard, an extension of the universal imperative in European ideology to conceptual ethics to speculative moral philosophy. The rhetoric of ethical motivation is placed into the syntax of universalism and abstraction. As with the other correlative terms of European value distinctions, this conception of humanism is used to place European culture at the top of a scale on which the least European, i.e. the cultural philosophies that differ most from the abstract norm, are at the bottom. It is the same scale as the one that places Christianity at the top because it is supposed to be monotheistic and universal. The same scale that is used to denounce religion in favor of the scientific. The same scale by which Europeans forms become the most universally valid and therefore progressive. According to this scale, that means of valuation. The least European is the lowest. This is tautological, since it is de facto a European scale. In terms of European humanism, the higher motives are the more abstract and belong to higher cultures. The better and more moral interests are the more universal. Self-interested actions represent lower morality. This is the logic of European humanist rhetoric. It does not matter that this obviously does not describe European motivation. In these terms, commitment to or sentiment for one's concrete surroundings represents a low degree of development. R.S. Vatre typifies this view in his description of the Asante of West Africa. The respect which an Ashanti was taught from an early age to show for their lives and property of others outside his own group was not due to any abstract reality for the sanctity of the lives or property of his neighbor. It was due to purely materialistic considerations, a desire for his own preservation and safety, but somewhat similar results were attained as when man, in a more advanced stage, followed the same course of action from different and higher motives. Rattray's implied association between the sanctity of proper and higher motives reveals his own materialistic and capitalistic considerations. I gotta remember what page. Wait, hold on. I just remember what page I was gonna end at. Okay, 544. Okay. We are concerned here specifically with the way in which the rhetorical mode of this aspect of European humanism is used to support the European self-image and how it manifests itself in European expression. Mary Kingsley characterizes the motivations of the West African this way. The individual is of supreme importance to himself, and he values his friends and relations, but abstract affection for humanity at large, or belief in the sanctity of lives of people with whom he is unrelated, the African barely possesses. Alright, so according to the same humanistic attitude referred to in the statement, it is through the exposure to other moralities that people can learn to overcome their own tribal morality. But the above statements are made by European anthropologists with a much more intense and lengthy exposure to diverse moralities or unfamiliar groups than the average European will ever have. And their comments are representative, not exceptional, among those made by Europeans who have knowledge of other cultures. It is the misconception of the value and possibility of abstraction that gets in their way. But this misconception is not easily avoided because it is reinforced by the European utamawazo and other aspects of European ideology. In both descriptions, the implication is that Africans are somehow morally deficient because they do not have these abstract conceptions. What is significant is that in neither case is the actual behavioral pattern of the persons being called into question. This is a manifestation of the hypocritical character of the European system of morality and the rhetorical and purely verbal forms that their ethics are able to assume. By no stretch of the imagination can these social scientists say that they have observed Europeans generally exhibiting a more profound regard for the sanctity of human life, nor greater affection for other human beings than the Africans whom they observe. But that is not the point, not for a person who has been trained to think in terms of European modalities. Such a person will more than likely manifest the subtle and intellectual expression of European cultural nationalism. Within the logic of European humanism, one can talk about morality that is not reflected in behavior. One is considered to be highly moral if the language that one uses is couched in the syntax of abstraction and of universality, that is, of disinterest. This makes no sense in other cultures where morality is concerned with behavior only and is meaningless unless it is indicative of a behavioral norm, which is the more human, the way of life that dictates respectful behavior, or the one that attempts to encourage an abstract affection for humanity at large, which has no relationship to behavior and to which the individual cannot relate. The answer lies in part to a comparison of behavior towards unrelated people. It is European exploitation and aggressive behavior towards others that is consistent with abstraction as a normative goal. It has been to the detriment of other people that their conceptions have not allowed them to act with an intense and sustained hostility as Europeans have. It is their very humanity that has obstructed their political vision. Via European doublethink, Africans become xenophobic, and the Europeans xenophilic. This is a lesson to be learned from the Gikuyu legend concerning the coming of the Europeans and Ai Kwai Arma's poetic statement of ruinous opening. See chapter 5. It has been pointed out that the more abstract the conceptualization, the greater the difference between verbalized moral attitudes and concrete acts. Stanley Diamond demonstrates this distinction between verbalized abstraction and concrete behavior as manifested in the morality of European and majority cultures, respectively in the following quote. Among the Winnebago, no mere mouthing of an ideal of love can gain an individual either admiration or respect in the absence of appropriate behavior. Consonant with this attitude is the degree of love insisted upon. One cannot love everybody equally. Above all, say the Winnebago, do not love your neighbor as you love those of your own house. Only if you are wicked will you love other people's children more than your own. To love everyone alike is impossible, and a statement to that effect would not only be insincere, but unjust, because it would lead to the neglect of those whom one ought to love most, if one is to learn to love at all. In this mode of cognition, one deserves neither credit nor discredit for giving expression to normal human emotions. It is the context, the concrete effect that count. It is wicked to love other people's children as much as your own. It is wicked to love your enemy while he is your enemy. And Frantz Fanon admonishes African and other majority people to leave this Europe where they are never done talking of man, yet murder men everywhere they find them, at the corner of every one of their own streets, and all the corners of the globe. For centuries they have stifled among the whole of humanity in the name of a so-called spiritual experience. Look at them today swaying between atomic and spiritual disintegration. That same Europe where they never stopped proclaiming that they were only anxious for the welfare of man, today we know with what suffering humanity has paid for every one of their triumphs of the mind. Okay, so that's what I wanted to read up to. Yeah, that was a mouthful. What did you think about that? Cicely?
Do you ever find yourself pausing when you reading Yurugu just to be like, damn?
Sure. You said, whatever find myself pausing and say, damn? Yeah, of course. This is a book, you know what I'm saying? This is a...
No, like, that's not his fun. It's like, damn. You be like, oh my God. I think that passage, that particular section was very clear in terms of just, we saying that we have these concepts of love and humanism. Mm-hmm. We're saying that, and meanwhile, we're killing everybody we see. And everybody we can easily, if we can't easily control them and use them, we're killing them. And, man, damn,
Yeah, I see Machiavelli's in the building. Just Htp family.
Cool.
Correctly.
All right, so check this out. So, what I would say about this is, yeah, I mean, this is actually pretty interesting. So she's saying that, love as a concept, or morality as a concept, isn't just something you mouth or you talk about. But that's exactly how Wazungu approaches it. And I think one of the bigger stories of today, and for some reason, I don't know why, but I guess because everybody's into religion, is this Israeli-Palestine situation, right? And what you'll notice is that whereas all these Wazungu, and even African people, but mostly Wazungu or European people, are mouthing their moral endorsement of Palestine, in a sense, right? Their behavior isn't that way. Their behavior is hands off. Their behavior, and I think actions speak louder than words.
You know what else?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what else is interesting about it? We can talk about it, right? And we can feel sympathy for people living under apartheid regimes, right? But then we come down a little bit closer to the equator, and we encounter scenarios that are playing out in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and it's all of a sudden we don't have any feelings anymore.
No feelings. No. And that's the thing. That's another thing too. On top of that, But that's what I'm saying. Like,
so hypocritical. It's so funny.
But yeah, and ultimately, I want to say too that what we find as moral and ethical almost never includes the behaviors of our people or the behaviors of other people. They don't have to do anything but say, oh yeah, we love you, we love all people. And I thought that one of the things that I thought was really interesting was how those people who are familiar with Christian propaganda, right, or even those people who are not familiar with it, you'll notice that this whole love your neighbor and love your enemy is straight out of the Christian playbook, straight out of the Christian handbook, and it's the delusion and it's a confusion, and you see that other people, I don't know who the Winnebago is, I didn't look it up, but you see that other people have said, no, that's wickedness, that's evil. To love you, like for instance, I got my son, right? To love another person's son more than I love my own son, or even evenly as I love my own son, is just bizarre, or if you were to act in a way that behaviorally along those lines, you know. And that's something that we all get caught up in, you know. I remember going to Sunday school once upon a time. I still remember these songs from my childhood, you know, which was like, you know, how many years ago. But it's like you're singing about how this entity named Jesus loves you, you know. And it's like, and of course the love is even, you know, whether you're criminal, whether you're this, whether you're that, the love is even, notwithstanding. And it's like that doesn't even register. It doesn't make any sense. But it kind of shows you that if you really think about it, it's built in to confuse you and disarm you. You know, because if you love the criminal, it's like actually a good example is when that white girl shot the Bottom Jean, right? She shoots Bottom Jean in his house, opens his door, right? He's listening to music, I think maybe smoking weed or something, right? Just listening to music, maybe dancing in his own living room. She opens his door and shoots him, executes him, right? Probably, and this is probably because he's, as far as I understand, he might have been like West Indian. He probably was playing music all the time, right? Under her, she probably didn't like it. Who knows? Who cares? Point is that she goes in, shoots him, and then walks out, right? And then his brother hugs her at her trial and says, you know, I hope you get a small sentence. I forgive you. I love you. The woman who just opens his brother's door and shoots him. He's like, oh, I love you. You know? What kind of like you have to be like this is intellectually disarming, but it's coming from a particular source. So it's like there's a whole conversation about like what is the bad, what is the negative about these universal ideas, what is the negative about these universalism and these confusions, and you kind of see it that in indigenous cultures they understood. No, you know, we might respect you, but we're not going to put you above our own people. But then what the white person is saying, no, put me on the same level as your own people, notwithstanding what I do, you know.
Or not even on the same level, even higher.
Exactly.
Even higher.
Like low key. You understand? Low key, even higher. So yeah, I think that was a pretty. I think it's like you said. It was a damn. You know. Let me see if there's anything else in here that we probably didn't touch on. Let's see if the comments. Anybody in the comments? No, nobody in the comments has anything to say about this section. And by the way, feel free, everybody in the comments, to comment on the section. But yeah, the humanist, the European. Oh yeah, so I thought it was also interesting how she was pointing out how these white people also. This is the thing that I've noticed too. I might have picked it up from this book, to be honest though. But how we kind of describe cultures, like I would say pre-literate. I feel like I got that from this book though. I don't think I was saying it before, but pre-literate society, so on and so forth, kind of implies that everything is going towards whatever white people have, and that white people represent the developed side of everything that we're talking about, you know? And I would say, even for me, I'm going to probably start using spiritual societies versus aspiritual societies. You know, I'm not going to say pre-literate versus literate. I'm not going to say developed versus underdeveloped. I'm going to say spiritual societies because that's what we have, and aspiritual societies, which is what they have, which is, or even like if you want to say confused, I don't know, but I might not say that per se, but I'm just saying that we have to start even renaming what we call this different world dichotomy, if anything, if we're going to dichotomize, you know, on a value-based system, you know. But I also thought that was interesting how, you know, she's saying that we're making it so that the white folk are the xenophiles and the black folk are the xenophobic, and it don't make no damn sense. But it is what it is. I think that's enough of that chapter. Unless you have anything else to say. Okay, so we're going to go to 548. Oh yeah, 548. Okay, so 548. And this is just because we got you. We finally got the reference that I was looking for to Karl Marx. Because my thing is that I noticed that when we talk about universalism and we talk about progress and we talk about this and that you know, Marx is there. You know, like Marx represents this whole idea, but instead But like we don't look at Marx in the sense of the European ultima ratio. So I was glad that the sister did in fact touch on him. So let's go to page 548, and we're going to start off at Europeans are not. Okay. And by the way, everybody in the comments section, if while I'm reading this, you think that you want to tell me, like if you have a comment on it, just let me know and we could read it. It looks like I'm a bookman did a comment. She says, I think if you combine the forgiveness mandates with the New Testament ideas that authority comes from Yahweh, you see how it's designed to inspire submission to empire. So make sure y'all check out I'm a bookman's channel, and because she really like she's a whole biblical scholar, and she's doing it for she's doing it for the people now. So that's what's up. All right, so let's go. So Europeans are not the only people who make transubstantive errors, although they may be the only ones who make them intentionally. We Africans and other primary people also make such errors when we trust Europeans and treat them as family, taking them at their word. The concept of asili has been created to prevent us from making these mistakes. Using it, we can interpret European culture in terms of its own nature. The ultimate goal of the cultural, political survival of all peoples does not necessarily imply the denial of culture by an affirmation of the transcultural experience. It is a question of strategy and behavior, of where you start from, and of what possibilities are thereby left to you. The stated desire to rise above culture, to universalize commitment, has most often resulted in an ineptness at political mobilization and a failure to change European society. European epistemological predilections, in combination with the European ultima rojo, energy force, generate two closely related styles of thought that are generally connected under the rubric of humanism. On the one hand, we have tradition that is incapable of extricating itself from the behavior it purports to criticize and succeeds in a hypothetical stance, merely paying lip service to moral-sounding abstractions about humanistic behavior, while being immobilized politically. At the other end of this very limited spectrum are the progressives, who run into a strangely related set of problems. Karl Marx offered an analysis of history and of capitalist society. Most of those who have accepted his analysis have raised it to the level of ideology. They have made of his analysis an ism. In so doing, they have succumbed to the European worldview in which science becomes religion, scientism, and universalism is expressed as internationalism, the obliteration of cultural difference, in which revolutionaries are expected to commit themselves to the universal goal of a classless society. Ironically, Marxian analysis, because of its narrow materialism, only inspires viable revolution when it is rooted in cultural circumstances where it can be supplemented by more spiritualistic worldviews and therefore nurtured. The resultant movement arises, therefore, from the specific historical experiences of the people involved. The more intellectualized, abstract, and universal in its application, the less its viability as an effective organizing tool. The most liberal and progressive Europeans take the position that they are best qualified to lead the rest of us in our war against their people. Of course, enemies become necessarily abstracted as forces and not cultural beings in order to support their position of continued superiority as our leaders. But Europeans are least able to universalize authentically, since their worldview is myopic, while the African worldview is more genuinely universal, in that it is global, holistic, and synthetic. But we have no need to speak for everyone. Roslick has said Marx failed to see that once having endorsed the fundamental values of industrialism, his socialist alternative might have no choice but to let his dynamic capitalist competitor pace it along the course of history. The two centers may bear different banners, but they are in the same race. It becomes somewhat difficult to tell them apart. The most profound critique of Marxism, however, comes from the black radical tradition, as Cedric J. Robinson tells us, and his work probably represents the apogee of that tradition, a synthesis of the African-centered critique in his regard. Robinson understands that Marxism, the dominant form of the critique of capitalism, has assumed in Western thought incorporated and theoretical and ideological weakness which stem from the same social forces which provide the basis of capitalist formation. Marxism, therefore, while providing an effective analytical vocabulary for the critique of capitalism, failed to place its origins firmly within the specificity of European experience. Marx's critique would, as a result, ultimately lack viability from an African frame of reference because his own thoughts was forged from the same metaphysical conventions as that of Hegel, Darwin, and Spencer. And while Marxism claims to be internationalist, it is, as well as capitalism, Robinson argues, grows out of a European nationalist sentiment. This is to be expected since sensitivity to the characteristics of humanness is not implied in the European concept of humanism. A culture responsible to human needs is more to the point, and this ideological commitment does not require universalism or abstraction. European humanism has issued from the tradition of European rationalism. It suffers from the same insensitivity to spirituality as the culture does generally. It is the sense consistent with the European ultima ratio. European humanism has not been properly distinguished from the European scientific tradition. Science in European thought is defined mechanicalistically, not humanistically. If humanism is defined as the recognition of the possibility of spirituality in human beings, and in terms of concrete behavior, then European abstract humanism is not a viable means to a more human society. True humanism is spiritual, not rational, which places it outside of the West, not in. It involves more of a transcendence and holism characteristic of the African worldview than the universalism of European thought. Okay, that's it. So organic African paradigm is here. They said, I am also here, and I come to learn. All right, so peace, organic African paradigm. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's Scully. So peace, Scully. All right. But I mean, I could be mistaken because I thought he had a different title. But anyway, so sister, what you gonna say? What do you want to say about that? Sister? Oh, I can't hear you.
I think this is, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not hearing you. If you can maybe sign out, sign back in. That sometimes works when people can't hear you. But in the meantime, I'll try to go into. Oh yeah, so yeah, Karl Marx. Oh, actually, I did think this was interesting for the sister to hear. So we're gonna just wait for her to sign out, sign back in. She sent me a message, but mostly out at this moment. We'll call back. Okay, so she says her network is mostly out at the moment, so she'll just call back. So all right, it's just me. I mean, unless Machiavelli want to step in, but Machiavelli ain't read the book yet, so he about to step in too. All right. So what can I say about this? So this I think is really interesting in terms of socialism, Marxism. Let me see. Cicely, are you there? Okay, yeah, she said that network is mostly out. All right. So I would say that this is pretty interesting in terms of socialism, Marxism, right? What can I say? I was prepared to just piggyback off of her. Let's see, where are we at?
I got your back.
All right, bro. What would you say about this passage?
Which passage?
This guy, man. All right, so the one about socialism and Marxism. All right, so here's what I like about this. So she says that socialism rises to the level of religion, and you kind of see that in our people, and also I like how she points out how, in terms of, hold on a second. Yeah, she said her network is going down, okay, I can't hear her right now.
Can you hear me?
Okay, now I can hear you, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Wow.
Alright, so what I would also say is that ironically Marxian analysis, because of its narrow, so it gives you this religion, it gives you this universalism, it gives you this internationalism, which is the obliteration of cultural differences. That's very important. It makes people feel like they're revolutionaries but their revolution is towards a rational existence instead of a spiritual existence, and the rational existence does not work. But on top of that, it also kind of decimates and destroys our people. So it's kind of like it goes back to that theme earlier about what is liberation to us. Is liberation the elimination of cultural differences? Is liberation the elimination of African languages? You know, is that what liberation means for our people? But that's what liberation means to a Marxian society. Now, granted, the classless theme isn't really practical, but also I think this is really interesting. Razak, who might be a white person themselves, they're saying, look, if you're putting industrialism at the center of your society, which is what Marxian, which is what this version of socialism does. It puts industrialism at the center, and that's why people like Nkrumah and people like Nyerere had to get loans from outside of Africa in order to industrialize, and then that kind of like burden their communities and burden their societies, because in order to pay these loans, they had to be, they had to be. Sorry, Cicely. No, we can't hear you because of the. You sound like no. All right, so I will just wait for you to get your the thing back. But what I say about that is that industrialism. But then you also notice that industrialism and socialism, what it will do is it will parallel capitalism, or necessarily will parallel capitalism, because even if you understand what industrialism is on its core and its basis, you're going to need to get the resources out of Africa. You're going to need to take the resources out of Africa, and so you're going to need to. And the thing is that these resources in Africa are not cheap unless you make it cheap. Coltan, copper, these are not cheap materials unless you as a European society, or you as a Chinese society, or you as any people make it cheap. And if you do not make it cheap, then industrialization becomes unaffordable. I'll say it this way. In fact, if we go like part of the success of industrialism, let's just go into that. Part of the success of industrialism is exploitation of land. You know what I mean? Which, of course, goes back to, like I said, the Christian, like everybody pointed out earlier, the Christian ethic and so on and so forth. But part of it is and I'll say it this way, and this is how I'll say it. If you were in a feudal society, right, and you wanted a suit of armor, right, you would have to pay a blacksmith, right, to forge that armor, right? So they will have to get the metal, the iron from somewhere, right? Unless they're on top of a mine, they will have to go import the iron from somewhere else. So that would be at the cost that iron is being exported. So you will be unable to afford that. So like only a few people will be able to afford that suit of armor because one, it has to be transported from another part of the world, right? And two, somebody has to do the human labor to make it get done, right? That's a huge cost. Now, how do you cut the cost? How do you get it so that you can have mass-produced suits of armor? You will have to, instead of paying a craftsman, the top, 15 hours or 40 hours of work to make the suit of armor, you'll have to cut down the cost of that, Not just that, you'll have to cut down the cost of transporting the metal. Not just that, you'll have to cut down the cost of how much the metal is worth. And the only way that you're going to affect the cost of the metal is by suppressing the country where you're importing the metal from. If not, suppressing the group that you're getting the metal from. Because the blacksmith himself is not going to go into the mines and get the metal out, right? So that's in itself. So basically you have to, at some level, in order to make it affordable to have masses of metal, masses of ironwork, or steel or whatever, you're going to have to at some point lower the cost to make it affordable. Otherwise, it's not practical for humans to have that. And so a lot of these devices that we have, they are outside, or like the television or the computer that I'm talking out of, that I'm talking to or whatever. This device is made by a factory that's worth, billions of dollars, this factory that's worth billions of dollars, you don't have that kind of money sitting around, as an individual, and the minerals in the computer, if you were to time it, if you were to price it correctly, would make the computer worth thousands of dollars when it's not, So that really is But in order for the computer to not be thousands of dollars, you have to get the coltan cheap. And if you're getting the coltan cheap, it's because you're using child labor, and you're underpaying the miners and miners who are down there getting up the thing. So it's like, if industrialism is really at the core of your philosophy, whether you're a capitalist or a socialist, right? You're going to have that exploitation. There's no way that the socialists are going to have these computers and so on and so forth otherwise. And that's why somebody was actually telling me that they traveled to Cuba because apparently Obama opened up Cuba. I had no idea, but anyway. But they traveled to Cuba, and I was like, hey, how was Cuba? And they were like, it was like a time machine, like it was like the past, or like a image of the past. But it's like they didn't have internet for a long time. They didn't have computers for a long time. They didn't have television for a long time. But that's partly because they I guess they weren't exploiting people. You know what I mean? Like they weren't going out of their way to exploit the Congo, per se. You get what I'm saying? And that's really what it comes back to, or what it comes down to. That if you do not have, if you're not a part of this system, if you're not a part of this global, exploitation system, you're probably not going to have a lot of things that you will have. And it's questionable whether white people who are trying to progress and trying to get to the next technological level and trying to leave the planet or what have you, if they're willing to stop doing that, because it's not just coltan. I think not just coltan, but maybe copper, or a lot of these things are fundamental to space travel. It's fundamental to space travel. And then like places like the Congo produce like 80% of the world's coltan, or like 70% of the world's copper, or something like it's a lot of the resources are in Africa, So that's something that's important and imperative. But I also, I kind of just went on a tangent, but Organic African Paradigm says, yes, it's Scully. Please, can you elaborate on some of the chapters? He says, no, we should give each language a responsibility. No, we should give each language a responsibility in our language. Cuba has an embargo on it. Yeah. So Cuba has an embargo on it. The other chapters. He says, elaborate on some of the other chapters. The other chapters. It's a whole series. So, like each chapter I did, it was like we went into each chapter individually, but generally speaking, that they all follow a different theme according to the title that they have. So yeah, that's Scully. So peace to Scully. Make sure you guys follow Scully as well. He's a brilliant thinker. And he's offering solutions where a lot of people aren't. Okay. So yeah, Karl Marx. But yeah, I think this is pretty interesting. I think people who are sympathetic to socialism should really look into this kind of thing, and also like their claim to humanism, or even rational humanism, but humanism in general, and how they kind of disarm us as African people as like, yeah, let's do this. But then you also see that the success of socialism a lot of times, as remember Ani points out, is within cultures that are cultural, and so even though Marx is trying to do away with culture, he's ironically that's where his philosophies could actually hold, but you have to kind of ignore him and get rid of him in a sense. So I'm going to go to page 551, and only because I really wanted to wait for Cicely, but like I said, she's in Ghana, which has arguably the best internet in has one of the best internet in Africa, but no, I'm just joking. But like that's something that we have to understand too. That even if we're talking, like, you have to go about and say we have to provide services for our people. One of the things a lot of people bring up is the idea that I think Gaddafi was trying to launch a satellite because all of Africa is kind of using somebody else's satellite, or like Europe satellites, for their own internet or whatever. I don't know what it's for. But the point is that if we could launch our own satellite, we could have our own high-speed internet, and all that kind of stuff, all that kind of jazz. We build up the infrastructure of Africa, and that's something that we can do. It's like if you're trying to go about if you're trying to decide what you want to do with your life, that's another thing altogether where you say, let me focus on what my people need, what my people want, and then you go and do that. You like that's how this world is. And say what you want about white people. There's a lot of not good things you can say about them, but they do provide for their people's needs. To a large extent.
As Marcus Garvey said, "What men have done, men can do."
Exactly. The deep voice brother said it. Anyway, all right. So check this out. So we're gonna go to 551. This is actually the end of chapter 10, and then she's gonna have a conclusion later. But she says we cannot mobilize for effective resistance to our physical destruction unless we are ideologically liberated. What impedes that liberation is cultural imperialism. European universalism and its attendant spurious humanism are very dangerous and effective forms of European cultural imperialism. Universalism, when translated scientifically, becomes objectification. The illusion of objectivity promotes the myth of universalistic commitment, that is, it is the stance that disavows political or group interest. It thereby services group interest more subtly by calling it something other than what it is. We can conclude that this universalism semantically represents European value. It is not a universally valid goal, and as an imperative serves the interests of European cultural imperialism in the following manner. Once individuals are persuaded that universal characteristics are the proper human goal, European patterns and values can be presented as universal, while others are labeled as particular. The European ideology can be proselytized without the appearance of imposition, invasion, conquest, exploitation, or chauvinism. The European claim to universalism is a formidable weapon, and victims of European aggression can successfully combat it if we proceed as follows. 1. We refuse to accept universality as either humanly possible or desirable. And 2. We critically assess all universalistic concepts, including monotheism, scientific objectivity, progressivism, abstract humanism, and reject them when they are found to represent European values only and to conflict with conceptualizations based on our own ideologies. And 3, accept nationalism, that is, cultural commitment, as a potentially positive, liberating, and constructive expression of human energy, depending on the specific content and definition that is given. If we are mindful of these cultural facts, European self-interest expressed as universalism will become highly visible as an expression of European nationalism and cultural commitment, and will thereby lose its intellectual and ideological effectiveness. We will be able to recognize ourselves as victors, for it is now clear that European universalism acts to fulfill the expansionistic Utamaroho as it serves the ideological function of Utamawazo, cognitive structure, and the power it needs of the Asili, cultural essence. Rather than being understood then as the new nonpartisan morality of an international order, we must interpret universalism in its European context in terms of the particularity of the European Asili. It is a quintessential statement of European nationalism. So let's see, is Cicely back? Yeah, Cicely's back. So, Cicely, you there?
I'm here. What page was that?
Okay, so this was page 551, and it was it started off with "We cannot mobilize for effective resistance," and then it just goes to the end of this chapter, right? Let me see if there's any comments. So yeah, so Scully was giving us a description. All right, so hold on a second. So Machiavelli, you heard that or not? Machiavelli? Okay. So, all right. So anyway, so I'm gonna start the timer. I'm just gonna go into it. So yeah. So before that, you see that she mentioned some people: Edwin Wilmot Blyden, Cheikh Anta Job, Duze Muhammad, Yosef Ben Yakin, and John Henry Clark. Oh, that's another thing I wanted to point out about the earlier section. That the first person she called professor in this whole book was John Henry Clark, and the reason being, for people who don't know, is that I used to describe Remember Ani? Well, I knew Muhammad originally as the protege to John Henry Clark. You know, but I mean, she's phenomenal in her own way. You know, like way phenomenal. But usually there are people who would be like the leading students of another person like Carlos Cooks to Marcus Garvey, Francis Cress Welsing to Nearly Fuller Jr. And then I can't remember the name of I guess of Benyakinen's like protege in a sense, but you know I had him on my website. But then there's also to John Henry Clark. So she called him professor, which I thought was a nice thing because she's always talking about academics and professors in a sense, but she only called him professor because you know he was her professor, right? But anyway, so I think this is really important. She gives us 3 ways to navigate, and I think this is really important too. I want to say this because some people are going to hear this and be like, "Well, I actually saw this universalism in Mohammedanism, you know, in Islam, right? In the sense of, you know, a lot of people will say, hey, well, Islam came through Africa peacefully, so on and so forth. And it's like, oh, it came through West Africa peacefully. Well, or they say, you know, Upper Africa. Well, they say Sub-Saharan, but you know what I'm saying, right? But you know, this is after they invade and conquer, and they fail at invading and conquering, you know, West Africa, right? But the point being, though, is that, you know, they come and they give you this religion and say, this is a universal religion. This is the religion of one God, you know? And it's really important to, you know, like Ravani is challenging. It's like, I was just reading some passages. I mean, I was, you know, talking on Twitter, and some brother pointed out that there was a passage in the Wazungu Bible, right, which praises Africa's, which praises like the destruction of Kemet, you know. So I'm gonna just read it quickly. In Kemet, okay, so it's Isaiah 20, where it says, "So shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptian prisoners and the Ethiopian captives, young and old, naked and barefoot, even with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt. And they shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia, the expectation in Egypt, their glory." So if you look at Isaiah 20 or whatever, it's this Wazungu. I mean, it's basically they're saying that their God, their Assyrian God, or their Aryan God, is on the side of the Assyrians decimating the Egyptians and saying that the Egyptians were dumb for not worshiping their God or something like that. And it's like, this is what they're pushing on you. This is their universalistic God. And so what I found interesting is that the Muslims and the Christians and the Jews, they say we all have one God. And the reason why they all have one God is because their one God agrees that they should end black supremacy. They should end black power. You know, like agrees or is in consensus against black power. You know? Like the way how they identify their one God is that their one God was on the side of the Assyrians instead of the Egyptians. You know? And the Egyptians were worshiping something else or someone else or whatever, but the real God, the one God, the true God or whatever, was about destroying the Egyptians. You know? And this is and if you understand what was going on in Egypt at the time, or in Kemet at the time, this was the last time of black power. This was the last example of black power in the ancient world. You know? This was the fall, like this was Taharqa losing against the Assyrians. You know, after the new kingdom, after first kicking out the Wazungu out of Kemet and restoring Kemet and the black African tradition, you know, essentially the Assyrians come, and again, like I said, they had mass-produced iron equipment, right? Like 100,000 soldiers in iron weaponry, you know, when most people didn't have, like most people only had iron rarely, and most people were like wearing bronze or something. You know, going against iron is not really easy, but the point is that, you know, spiritually, these Wazungu are all in unity against Africa's success. So it's like, you have to, oh, Sicily's not here. So you have to, you know, like Ravani is saying, you have to refuse universally, because it's not even possible for people on two different sides of the issue to say, to desire the same thing. You know, the destruction of Egypt is not universally good. It might be good for the Assyrians. It might be good for the Aryans, right? The people, the Aryan god that Yahweh. It might be good for Yahweh, but it's not good for the Africans and the Ammonites and the Ammonians and so on and so forth. It's not good for them. It's not good for us, right? So she also goes critically assess all universalistic concepts, including monotheism, because again, monotheism is actually, I would say, it's actually the problem, in the sense of, Akhenaten pushes up this monotheism to say, oh, all people have one God. No, it's you have your own spiritual beliefs, your own spiritual conceptions, and you want to keep those. You want to hold on to them. Scientific objectivity is another one. We can't just go about and say, hey, there's a way to be scientifically objective. In the physical sciences, it's more reasonable, right? In the social sciences, it's not reasonable. It's like the example she gave earlier with the anthropologist. The anthropologist goes and says, hey, these people do not look at love abstractly, knowing full and damn well that in their own society, if they were sitting down with their own people in the bars and whatnot, there wouldn't be this abstract love of humanity either. It's a very particular, it's very particular academic or intellectual, in a sense, point of view that is not really adaptable if you're just observing people in how they live and how they present themselves. Yes, maybe if you go into a church, you might hear that kind of nonsense, but you might not hear that in a bar. You might not hear that in a strip club or whatever. You know what I mean? Like the example of whatever, progressivism. Just progress as progress to what? Progress to white hierarchies, white supremacy, white people in space, and that kind of stuff, right? And then of course abstract humanism, this idea that we love this because it's humans. It's like even though I would be critical of Israel or whatever, it's also the case of why do you care about this Palestinian? Why do you care about this Israeli? Why do you care about anything that's going on in this other part of this world? What does this have to do with you? And of course, and of course, it goes back to this behavior versus more rhetoric. Like rhetorically, you can say rhetorically, you could say whatever you want. You can say, oh yeah, I care about this stuff, but what is your behavior going to do? And that's really like what I was actually grasping at when I was critiquing some sister who was like, I think she said solidarity for or something like that, or she basically said pray for. She said free Palestine, free Sudan, free Nigeria, free. It's like, what is your behavior? Free Cuba, and it's like, what is your behavior? Because if you were to go about and try to free all these people behaviorally, you will run out of resources. If you if you hardly have resources to quote unquote free Nigeria, then you definitely don't have resources to free Palestine, Nigeria, Cuba, and Angola. You have to focus your behavior towards a particular country, and this kind of abstract way, I would even say that has to do with let's say our Pan-Africanists and so on and so forth, in the sense that we should be very particular, very concrete, and say, look, and really put our behavior towards our liberation, and that be that whatever it is. As she says, accept nationalism that is cultural commitment as a positive, potentially positive, liberating and constructive expression of human energy, and that's what it is. You want to put your energy towards whatever it is that you want to put your energy towards. But yeah, that would be. Oh, so that's one of the last ones. Now we have the conclusion. The conclusion is just going to be. You can kind of just read it yourself. I want to see if I could probably give you guys one passage from the conclusion, but I actually neglected to. I was reading it and I was like, I don't know which one because I have to have like one more left. So I'll just try to read. Maybe this right here. The power is logos. I'll just try to read a little bit of this and then we should go forward. So, by the way, Machiavelli, you here?
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Okay. Try to get this. Try to get this passage. All right. Let me see what the comments. Let me see what the comments are saying. Scully is saying universalism of verisimilitude of universalists, not actual universalism. Exactly. A very similitude of universalists. and it's not actual universalism. That's facts right there. That's true. All right, so let's go. Power as logos. So the concept of power then, born out of the nature of... So basically this conclusion is she's just going to go over all the stuff that she already said, you know? So, just to, just for giggles, just to touch on this last chapter, we're just going to touch on it. So this concept of power then, born out of the nature of the European ultima rojo, becomes the pivotal term in European ethnology. The nature of its center, its asili. The chronic disharmony and imbalance of the ultima rojo perverts spirit into lust. As emotional security is sought via material control, the need for fulfillment becomes a ceaseless will to power, i.e., the self-realization of the asili. The nature of the ultima rojo is itself the guaranteed source of continued energy to be put at the service of the European quest for greater and greater power. And this power drive becomes the premise of the culture, that fundamental aspect on which all others depend. It is a European asili. All European forms cohere in its dominant ideology. It has been the objective of this entire discussion to demonstrate the historical and syncretic depth and pervasiveness of this ideological force, which is the concept of asili has enabled us to recognize. Beginning with the premise of the need for power as it has been defined, the dominant modes of expressions of European thought and behavior become ethnologically explainable. The asili in which the will to power originates demands as well that the world be redefined in terms of power relationships. Every characteristic and theme discussed can be understood as a mechanism designed to achieve the illusory or actuality of European control. It is not simply the aspect of the culture taken in isolation that gives them European definition. On a non-ideological level, and alongside other themes and values, they are to be found in all cultures. It is the concept of power lying at the ideological base of the culture that mandates the artificial splits that characterize the ultima wazo. It is the mode of power and dominance that requires abstraction to be separated from concrete thought, which then becomes the true value of the value dichotomy. The true European becomes committed then to the universalization of this value dichotomy, reifying one of its terms, abstraction, while he demeans the other, concrete thought. These are all steps in the power process, which in turn, in terms of thought, issues from the ultima wazo, the cognitive manifestation of the asili. It is a mode of power that eliminates the possibility of conceptual unities. It is the mode of balance and harmony. On the other hand, that unity can be perceived even in ambiguity or contrast and inconsistency, for the European mind sees merely a battery of irreconcilable opposites, paradoxes. So European culture unfolds as a series of one definitions in which the world is consistently on every level divided into the conquering self and the controllable other, and two, mechanisms by which this self is assured emotional remoteness from the dominated object. This is the origin of the impersonalism Diamond recognizes and Razek has called the alienating dichotomy. The cognitive self is split into that which controls and that which is or should be controlled, and this projects into a self-image in which the Europeans become the destroying saviors. Others are simply imagined to be like that part of themselves that is to be controlled, that part of themselves that is object. Just as they must now allow themselves to be defined by the irrational, emotional part of themselves, seeking always to decrease its potential, so the culture as a whole gains power by denying these others the capacity for self-definition. Since all spirituality conflicts with the European concept of power, the possibility of spirit threatens its achievement. On a personal level, this makes love relationships even conceptually problematical, since love and power, as they are understood in the West, are opposites. Love represents loss of self and therefore of control, while power demands control of self and emotional remoteness. It is on an intercultural level that the expression of the European ultima rojo becomes more evident. As we have seen, in the European understanding, power is predicated on destruction. The maintenance of the European ultima rojo requires the destruction of other peoples. They are the ideal object of European power, since they are most remote from the European self-image. While the redefinition of humanness in terms of rationality, European power, other people become subhuman. They must therefore be controlled, culturally destroyed. This can be done without the moral disruption of European culture, since the help of objectification, such destruction is either not experienced or elaborately rationalized. Oh, actually, this might be good too right here. So while the ultima rojo demands the destruction of others, it is simultaneously dependent on the existence of the cultural other for its definition and functioning. It is, after all, the European ultima rojo that is least self-sufficient. Without other, there is no possibility of power. It is in this sense that European culture can never be self-reliant or even constructively isolationist. Europe itself is barren, depending on the resources, spiritual as well as material, of others for its existence. In accordance with this historical record of European intercultural behavior, capitalism demonstrates this well. It is acquisitive and exploitive in principle. It must ever seek new markets to control, new resources to exploit. It can never be a system at rest. Communalism and the African worldview, on the other hand, are predicated on balance and interrelationship, on the eternality of the moment. And I think that might be enough. Like I said, if anybody's interested in this book, you have the PDF at your availability. If you want to, like I said, you can go on the Discord, you could download it. You could even just download it on LibGen. If you don't know what LibGen is, go find out. Basically, you get a bunch of free books, if you want to, Is it legal? I don't think so, but, is this whole system...
It's not.
Is this system legal? No. You know what I mean? I know
when
that.
In doubt,
Yeah.
when in doubt, blame the system.
Exactly. When in doubt, blame the system. You know what I mean? Like, shit. Like, was it legal to steal? Was it legal to steal me? You know what I mean? No. So, all right. So what was I saying? Yeah. So that's a freaking 5-0 here. Right? you know all the laws. All right. So anyway, yeah. So that's Power as logo. So brother, were you able to follow that or not really? Like, I know it's harder without the text in front of you.
Well, one thing I got from it was, to me, it reiterates the fact of our oppression is that the reason why we're oppressed is because it's a benefit of our oppressors of, Wazungu or Askari, that's what they do. It's in their benefit to keep us this way. So us seeking morally for them to, to stop, for that moral conviction as being humans, it's against their own, will, their own benefit. So to me, that's the passage only reinforced that idea to me.
Yeah. And I mean, another thing is that I like how she demonstrates that there is a way of thinking that they have, where they tend to dichotomize everything. So, for instance, when we were saying Booker T. Washington versus Du Bois, right, there was also this brother named Kelly Miller, right? We don't talk about him, we don't know him, but the point is that there weren't just two people, The same when it comes to Malcolm X and Dr. King. We always hear about Malcolm X, Dr. King, but we don't hear about Robin Williams. Or not Robert, was it Robert Williams or Robert Williams, right? Robert Williams, right? So we don't hear about
Robert F. Williams.
Yeah, Robert F. Williams. Guns. Yeah, Negroes with Guns. We don't hear about that. Or we always hear about these dichotomies, these dualities, but we don't seem to, and the thing is that these dualities and this dualistic thinking follows from the European paradigm where they just present us with two choices. Same with like Democrat, Republican. Democrat, Republican. Good or bad. First world, second world. This, that, communism, capitalism. It's always a dichotomy. And it's always, pick one, choose one. Between the two, as opposed to the reality that the world is more nuanced, or even the reality that there's more nuanced points of views, So Kelly Miller, we don't process him, It's Frederick Douglass or Martin Delaney, I guess, right? But it's always just two people, Marcus Garvey or Du Bois or Booker T. Washington, this or that, so on and so forth. So, and it's never the three of them. It's never three people. It's always two. And that's really like what it comes to, because what happens is that white people in their thinking, based off of the Platonic mode of thinking, the Plato, what they do is they make one side superior to the other. They put a hierarchy, right? And they say that one side should control or even destroy the other. You get what I'm saying? So it's European culture or African culture, and European culture should either save the Africans or destroy them. The Axis and the Allies. The Allies need to destroy the Axis, or the Axis needs to destroy.
So either way, the control is still there, regardless whether you save or you destroy. There's still some control over it.
Exactly. Because see, at the base of it is this Plato, where Plato's saying that the human mind is separated into rationality and emotion, if you say, right? He actually did it in three. I think it was passion, desire, and logic, right? But anyway, point. But you know, passion and desire. But desire was more like your physical needs, like hunger, thirst, and passion was more like you know, like other stuff that weren't like physical needs in a sense. I mean, I'm not summarizing it perfectly because I didn't read this in like 20 years, but but you know, it is what it is, right? But the point is that but in the dichotomy, the rationale, like the logic, is seen as put it on the top. You know, make it control the other two. You know, make it control everything that's not logic. And it's the same with the Wazungu, because Wazungu represents himself as the most logical person. He's the scientific person. He's the universal person. And so he has to control and destroy the particular. You know, the black nationalists in America represent the, you know, the particular, the cultural, the only interested in the black folk, you know? And so he has to, as the scientific, universal man, destroy or control or save these people from themselves, you know? So you'll find that, for instance, the Black Panthers will mock black nationalists as pork chop nationalists or something like that, you know? And they're doing that because they're trying to save us from the ignorance of not doing a class analysis that is rooted in the universal fundamentals of society, of the world, when it's really just a Western world and a Western society. But they don't say it's just a Western world or Western society or European society. They say, oh no, class conflict is universal. And so then you have socialists like, I think it was maybe Rodney? I can't remember. But, you know, how you have undeveloped Africa, he's going to Africa and he's saying, we don't see class conflict. You know? We don't see these proletariat.
That's where that humanism comes into play.
Exactly. Oh, Walter Rodney, that's his name, right? Like, exactly. So, like, we don't see that, but it's like, yes, what they do is they give it to us and they say, and so other people, like people who are trained in socialism, trained in Marxism, they'll say, no, you know, no, you're not a good Marxist because you're looking at it from a cultural perspective, and you're ignoring the fact of this, so on and so forth. So it all comes back to, and of course, the most profound and deepest Marxists are going to be white people. And if it's not the white people alive, it's going to be Marx himself, who was a white man, you know? So it really comes down to, you know, this scientism, as she would point, which is like science as religion. And that is what it comes, like that's where it is. Like they have this dichotomy where they put their, what they want as the superior, as the one that should control the other one. And then they have the monopoly on claiming what is that. You know, so who is the most scientific community? It's Wazungu. You know, it doesn't matter if North Korea or South Korea comes out with something better or whatever. Like you know, like South Korean phones are like, you know, amazing or whatever. But we're still like, no, it's an American thing. You know, it's blah blah blah. So I thought that was interesting. I thought it was fascinating to see the growth of Plato, because like I said, one thing people are not gonna appreciate enough is that this Plato idea is not inaccurate, you know? That realistically speaking, white people say to themselves that all of European philosophy is a footnote to Plato. So that's a famous quote among white people. And so what Marimba Ani does is she kind of explores how this happens. So look, somebody's in the comment, they say, EL, I am following Medgar Evers, Garvey, etc. White people's mind is centered around war, and you won't really think about gradients or nuance in war. It's binary. And then both of them, and Al Bookman and EL say Walter Rodney. So yeah, they like, and that's another thing too. So I think that's something that should be mentioned a lot too, is that they're really focused on war, and they don't really care for nuance or gradients because it's war, and they're going by this binary thinking. But of course, I do want to link back that their binary thinking links back to, like I said, there being a footnote to Plato, where Plato does say, you know, this is the binary thinking is the ideal. This is the goal. The goal is to suppress emotional and non-rational and have rationality, science, all that at the top, and that works perfectly fine for people who are aspiritual and who do not see and you know, who do not have access to spirituality in the same degree that African people may. So I think that's actually all of that I could say about that. I know you weren't able to read the book, so I can't really ask you your final thoughts on the book. But you know, my final thoughts would be go out, read it. You know, fortunately, Cecily couldn't finish it with us, but you know, there's a whole section, there's a whole series, and I'm glad and fortunate that you guys joined me for this series. I appreciate everybody for listening. Definitely drop some likes, drop some comments. You know, share it with other people if you can. And yeah, I think this is wonderful. And another thing I want to point out is that Marimba Ani is alive and she's active today too. She just had an event in Atlanta last week. You know, anyway, she just had an event in Atlanta last week, and she was, you know, doing some good things, and she's really trying to rally serious people. And so, even though she wrote this book in 1994, right, she's still active to this day, and she was active back then too, as a student organizer and all of that. So you know, when you're giving people their roses, you know, give it to them while they're living. You know, make sure you try to find her contact. Try to send her, you know, a positive remark. Tell her that you read her book. Tell her that you heard only read her book. You know, that would be nice. But anyway, although, you know, whatever. But other than that, you know, I appreciate everybody for listening. Thank you for joining. Shout out to everybody who was on the panel, including, of course, my brother Machiavelli. But until next time, I know he's like, what you mean, brother? But until next time, Sharon Hotep, Anku Ja Senab Neb, Amen Ma'at Dua Necha. All right. Yeah. Okay.
And